Oh, you have to keep that part in, too. Don't clip that out.
The whole thing?
Yes.
It's like...
Nobody wants...
It's like you're allergic to any level of professionalism.
Yeah, but you don't understand. People want a rawness to podcasts because it provides an insight into something that is not so produced. Hello, and welcome, everybody, to another episode of the AfterBuzz podcast. My name is Nico Edgeman, your host of the AfterBuzz, and of course with me is Buzz Adams.
I like to run a tight board, man.
This is not radio. This is a podcast.
Uh-huh. Yeah, whatever.
It's very different. Welcome.
Yeah,
welcome
or as I call it, amateur radio.
To the 21st century.
And beyond.
All right. On today's episode of the AfterBuzz is part one in a series of episodes that we're going to do called Bizarre Historical Facts. Actually, it's going to be 120 bizarre historical facts.
So we'll be doing this till I retire, it sounds like.
Well, we're going to do 30 today. All right.
We can't do 30 facts in one podcast.
Oh, they're real fast.
Yeah, but I'm going to have extraneous
and that's the
comments,
point. We're going to try to 30 is the what I have planned for today. If we don't get through them all, they'll just get tossed into the next one. All right.
Clear your weekly calendar, folks.
Yeah. Well, like what else? Also, unlike Buzz's true facts. I think these are true.
Right, you didn't fact check.
Yeah, okay.
Source them.
Yeah, no.
I bet you I'll catch you in one that I know is wrong.
What?
Unless what's your where did you get these? From a BuzzFeed article or something?
Fascinate.com.
Fascinate.
Yeah. Fascinate. Like the word fascinate.
Oh, I thought you meant
like fasten.
That girl's so blessed. Her blouse has 10 buttons, but she can only fasten 8.
That was pretty good on the fly. All right. Number one. During World War II, the Russians trained dogs to run under German trains with bombs strapped to their backs.
Goddamn commies.
But unfortunately, the tanks the dogs were trained on were Russian tanks.
So they ran into...
So they ended up running under Russian tanks and blowing them up instead.
I just realized the Russians were our allies.
Yes, they were. Goddamn commies.
I'd rather them blow up a Nazi train than a commie train. But the dogs were my main concern.
That is the sad part, that they were like, yeah, we got disposable fucking dogs.
All right, 30 facts that may not be factual. Nico didn't check.
Pretty sure this one's true.
Okay.
Number two. When the Russian Bolsheviks overthrew the provincial government and stormed the Winter Palace in 1917, their revolution was paused for a couple days because the Bolsheviks found the wine stores in the Winter Palace and got ridiculously drunk.
I have never heard that story before, but sure.
Sounds about right.
Hey, man, we got to pause this October revolution.
The revolution!
We found the Tsar's wine.
Get more! We're out of wine. Continue the revolution.
There's a series on HBO or Max called A Gentleman in Moscow, and it's all about this Russian aristocrat played by Ewan McGregor who is confined for life to a luxury hotel.
But he's basically a prisoner.
He's basically a prisoner in the hotel.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
Good acting.
What was he like? Was he a spy or diplomat, or what was the reasoning?
Okay, so the story goes that this, and I don't know if it's based on a true story or not. He had written some poetry or something that seemed very sympathetic to the revolutionary cause. So some of his friends in high places got them to spare him. Otherwise, he would have been executed or exiled.
Oh, wow.
So,
all right. Number three. Robert E. Lee's Virginia home, was named Arlington House. Although he didn't.
I know this one.
He didn't buy it. He just was living in it at the time. It was confiscated by the Union and then turned into a cemetery.
Arlington National.
During the war. Mm-hmm. The idea, which was supported by Lincoln, was that if Robert E. Lee should ever return, he would have to look at the graves and see the carnage that he had created. Mm-hmm. In 1877, George Washington Custis Lee.
The
son, I believe, of Robert E. Lee.
In what year?
1877.
No, that would have been grandson.
George Washington Custis Lee?
Yeah, I believe so. Who was related to both George Washington and Robert E. Lee.
Mm-hmm. Well, he sued the federal government for confiscating Arlington illegally, and the Supreme Court awarded the estate back to him. What did Robert's son do with an estate littered with dead bodies? He sold it back to the federal government.
You got to give me my property back. I'll sell it back to you for how much?
$150,000 in 1877. That's like millions.
That takes a lot of nerve. And the government went along with it?
They did.
Spoils of war, baby. That's what I say.
I had no idea, though, that Arlington National Cemetery is this really historical place that...
I mean, it gives you an idea of how close Robert E. Lee lived to Washington, D.C. I mean, Arlington Cemetery is one of the places you got to see if you go to Washington, D.C.
I mean, Virginia's right there.
Don't film and then make a political campaign ad out of it, but you should definitely visit it. You really do get hit by the sense of history and the solemnness of all of it as soon as you walk in.
You've been?
Oh, yeah, one time. Yeah, it was great. I mean, it was very somber.
It was a party.
And no, it was moving.
Number 4, Confederate General Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson got his name during the First Battle of Bull Run.
I know. There stands Jackson like a stone wall in front of withering Union fire.
That is actually almost exactly the quote. Soldiers stated he stood like a stone wall in the midst of battle. God, you are so impressive sometimes.
Thank you.
He was accidentally shot and killed by his own men.
Yep, that's right. He was coming back, and they thought he was an enemy, and they shot him, and they amputated his arm, and then he died sometime after that. So his arm is actually buried in one place. His body is buried in a separate plot.
Which brings us to our next ridiculous fact. Number 5. Amputation was the most common treatment for broken or severely wounded limbs during the Civil War. There were too many wounded...
Give me a cast. Broken?
Even broken. There were too many wounded men for doctors to take time-consuming procedures like removing part of a bone or setting bones or mending damaged flesh. So more than half of leg amputations at the thigh or knee ended up being fatal. 83.
Below or above the knee?
Okay, so, excuse me. More than half, so more than 50% of leg amputations right above the knee. Okay?
Above the knee.
Right above the knee.
So you had a better chance if the amputation was below the knee.
Yes. And it'd be fatal. And 83% of amputations were fatal if it was at the hip.
Yeah, I mean...
Can you imagine them just cutting at the hip
in
your
like
entire leg off?
1864? Yeah, they probably triaged you. I mean, if it was a really bad battle, they probably said, yeah, there's no saving this guy.
Right.
Yeah. They knew what the odds were, probably.
They would just ask you to bite the bullet. Which brings us to fact number 6.
Are these all American history?
A lot of them are weirdly Civil War related, which I find interesting, which I didn't know.
Fascinating.
Number 6, anesthesia wasn't available, so patients were given chloroform, but often had to drink a glass of whiskey before they would bite down on an actual bullet.
Mm-hmm.
Are you fact-checking my source?
And I just want to see what that website is. Maybe is it fascinate.com?
Yeah, I think so. It is.
Fascinate?
No, factinate. Excuse me. Factinate.
All right. I might have found a new website. All right. Go ahead.
Okay, so biting the bullet.
This looks like my kind of website.
Yeah, see? Thank you. I've always wondered this about biting the bullet. Today's bullet casings look like they would be so hard they would break your teeth. But back then they were lead-based, or they would be softer, or what?
They were called mini balls. That's what was commonly used in a musket. So this was, I mean, there were rifles, but those were very expensive. So a lot of muskets shot them. It was a softer metal.
So you wouldn't break your teeth. I'm assuming you wouldn't like just automatically
You
break
might.
them.
I mean, I'm not saying you wouldn't. But yeah, they'd have you bite down on a bullet.
All right, next one. Bulletproof. During the American Civil War, a man named W.V. Meadows was shot in the eye during the Battle of Vicksburg. Not only did he survive, but he coughed up the bullet.
Hawk Tua. He was the original Hawk Tua. Can you imagine if you just spit it out in his hand and it was like, well, you... Was he on the Confederate or the Union side?
That is a great question, and my facts don't delve that deeply enough.
Okay.
But he didn't spit the bullet out then. It wasn't until 58 years.
58 years later.
Like one time at dinner.
So already in the he would survive getting shot in the eye?
He did.
And spit the bullet out.
Yeah.
Wow. Impressive, whichever side he fought on.
All right, moving away from the Civil War. Number 8. Head of the army. King Gujan of Yue, who reigned from 496 to 465 BC, placed a row of convicted criminals at the front of his army before a battle and asked the criminals to cut off their own heads. And they did, to scare the enemies away.
How did they cut off their own heads?
I guess it was between that or being tortured.
No, but how did they physically cut off their own heads?
Oh, with their swords. They would just like hack them. Yeah.
I don't think that's possible. I think it'd be a buddy system type of thing.
You do me, I'll do you.
Yeah. You cut my head off and then I'll cut. Well, that's not going to work.
Then the next, there would be one guy left if you got everybody else to cut. So. That would be pretty scary to see.
That is one I'm going to fact check later.
Okay. Number 9. Ilya Ivanovich Ivanov, a Russian scientist in the 1920s, conducted experiments.
The ape man experiment.
Where he tried to make a human-chimpanzee hybrid.
Apparently, he tried the experiment the old-fashioned way. He had somebody have sex with an ape. No,
before you get any naughty ideas, apparently he attempted the humanzee with artificial insemination.
I heard that the version of this that I've heard...
Well, that's fucked. That's even more fucked.
Is that at some point they were like, hey...
I mean, at some level, the artificial insemination is fucked because that means you're either getting a human semen and putting it into a chimpanzee female, or you're getting chimp jizz and you're putting it into a lady.
And I don't remember which it was supposed to be, but all right. So I've heard that story.
All right, number 10.
He was unsuccessful.
He was.
They say.
See, you like this topic. I know you do. Number 10. Mad as a Hatter.
Yeah.
Mercury. Boston Corbett, the man who shot John Wilkes Booth, was totally insane from handling mercury as a hatter.
Or a haberdasher.
You
mean he was mad as a hatter?
He was mad as a hatter. Point. 4 years before shooting Booth, he castrated himself with scissors, apparently remaining calm the entire time.
God damn. I guess he shot Booth without orders to do so. But he was hailed as a hero nonetheless.
Mm-hmm. Number 11. Dear Diary. The Diary of Anne Frank was actually edited by her father because, some would say rightfully, he didn't want some of the things published that she wrote.
She was like a kid. She wrote about, her favorite movie stars, and some of that's still in there.
He edited out writing about her period, discovering herself, learning about boys from a younger boy.
Yeah, Peter.
That was staying with them.
Yeah.
And apparently her father's infatuation with fart jokes.
Leave that in.
Papa
Come on.
loves the farts. Papa loves them.
He thinks that's so funny.
Number 12. During World War II, American propaganda was so effective at creating a dehumanizing picture of Japanese soldiers.
Oh man, I've seen the cartoons and the posters and stuff.
That American Marines in the Pacific kept body parts of Japanese soldiers as souvenirs.
Yeah. If you dehumanize any group of people, you start, atrocities happen.
That's not give me that arm.
Right.
Yeah. Number 13. Nero, the emperor of Rome from 54 AD to 68 AD, is famous for allegedly singing and playing the fiddle while much of Rome burned during the Great Fire.
Not a fiddle.
Correct. It was
a liar.
It was later speculated that this entire thing is false.
Well, yeah, but he was known to play the L-Y-R-E, liar.
Well, it was probably propaganda created by the next emperor. And the reason they know this is because, one, the fiddle hadn't been invented yet.
Right.
And
the fiddle hadn't been invented during the next administration either.
No.
I think they just called it a fiddle, but it was a lyre.
Right. Also, Nero wasn't in Rome at the time of the fire. Number 14. The love of contraception. Ancient Romans actually had an effective natural contraceptive. It was a plant called silphium.
They used so much of this plant, silphium, that it went extinct. Apparently, it must have worked. I mean, to use that much, that silphium no longer exists.
Yes. See, I knew you would love this topic. How much do you love this, what I'm doing right now? You already love it.
I mean,
every day for the listeners, Buzz is always bragging about, aren't you impressed with how smart I am about stuff? And it's always like, yes.
I don't say that.
See, you even had to say it with her, right? Okay.
God.
Also, did you know that the shape of the seed for silphium is apparently where we get the traditional heart shape from?
Yeah. A heart looks nothing like a Valentine's heart.
I always thought it was because
it's supposed to look like the silphium seed, but there might be depictions of it.
No, the Romans harvested so much that it went extinct,
Yeah.
and now we're not even sure exactly what type of plant it was. I always thought the shape of a heart came from like the buttocks of a woman or something.
Right.
Isn't that something?
Or the cleavage. And I don't know about that, but I've heard the whole silphium thing.
Number 15. Too lustful to be trustful. The FBI ignored compelling evidence of the attack on Pearl Harbor because Hoover, who was in charge of the FBI at the time, didn't trust a Serbian double agent named Dusan Popov, who was apparently a gambling, lustful drunk. His nickname was Tricycle because he loved threesomes so much.
Really?
Yes, and he was one of the inspirations for Fleming's James Bond.
He was one of the...
You want to Google this one? Dusan Popov?
I wouldn't even know how to...
Dusan Popov.
Usan.
Popov. Yeah.
Ba-ba-ba.
He kind of looks like a James Bondish. Rake. He looks rakish. The triple agent, real life James Bond. Wow. All right, so this is a good fact.
He served as part of MI6, so he was working for the Brits. He passed off disinformation to Germany. Oh, so that was the thing. They thought he was working for them, but he was actually working for the Allies.
Mm-hmm.
But Hoover didn't trust this guy.
And I think he was actually working for... Oh, look at the tricycle thing at the bottom. He was codenamed Tricycle.
He was codenamed Tricycle by the British MI5 because he was the head of a group of 3 double agents.
Okay, so the three-something might be... We could probably read it, that there might be some...
In 1974, Popov published an autobiography titled Spy, Counterspy, in which he recounted his wartime exploits. Popov is considered one of Ian Fleming's primary inspirations for the character of James Bond. But the tricycle thing...
he was rakish,
shot that
I
down.
bet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he's kind of handsome in an ugly... Kylo Ren sort of way, I want to say.
Number 16. Did you know Thomas Edison electrocuted a lady circus elephant to death? I think we might have mentioned this on air before. The elephant, though, had already killed 3 men, including an abusive trainer.
Mm-hmm.
Over 1,000 people came to watch her die.
Dude, you took an elephant out of Africa and you had an abusive trainer.
Of course it's going to, like...
She should have killed more.
Edison recorded it. Have you seen this famous video?
No. Can you put... Is that just a still photo?
That's the still. You could Google the video.
No, I don't need to see it.
Number 17. Shooting the poop.
Shooting the shit. We can say that, right?
Yeah, we can say shooting the shit. Just because a conflict is barbaric and loses lots of lives and blood is shed does not mean that all sense of moral dignity is removed. For example, an American Civil War code of honor forbade soldiers from shooting at men while they were pooping. I mean, it's one thing to be shot in service of your country. It's another.
Like, hey, if the dude's got his pants down around his ankle, he's popping a squat, don't shoot him. I bet that was not honored 100% of the time, though.
Right, like if you saw a general pooping, like that's a very high.
Well, the general probably had accommodations somewhere close to his tent, so he wouldn't. A general probably wouldn't be so close to the front lines.
Number 18.
Or he might be like Stonewall Jackson.
Yeah, exactly. Number 18. This is Sparta. The reason why the Spartans were able to be so focused on war and as soldiers was because of massive slavery.
Yeah. Helots. They were called the Helots.
Every single Spartan male was a soldier. That was all they did. There was no other job for them. And every other job was done by slaves.
Yeah. That's why if you were born like deformed, like Esquialtes, they had no use for you.
Right.
You remember the hunchback that sold out Leonidas?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the Spartans actually beat their slaves by law. We don't mean that the law allowed them to beat their slaves. The law required them to beat their slaves. And most horrifically, as a sort of coming-of-age holiday every year, there was an occasion where young Spartan men
went out and hunted the Helots.
Would sneak around and murder as many Helots as they could.
Right. And the Helots outnumbered the Spartan men something like 10-1.
Right. And there were tons of slave revolts, I think, later on, but they never won.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 19. An X-rated creation myth. There's an Egyptian creation myth that states the universe was the result of the ejaculation of the god Atum.
That makes sense to me.
To honor Atum, some pharaohs would ceremonially jack off into the Nile.
Well, that pharaoh sounds like they're in denial.
Is that crazy? These are bizarre historical facts, by the way. That's the title.
That was in honor of Atum.
Atum. Mm-hmm. Number 20. Claim your...
I don't know if we're going to get... You want to do 30? You said there were 100. We should do 20.
Well, let's do 25.
Oh, okay. All right, we'll split the difference.
Mongols used to light the fat of the enemies they killed on fire and then shoot it out of catapults onto the other enemies.
They would do what?
They would take prisoners and render them into fat. And
somebody had that job, I guess.
If you watch there's a show on Netflix called Marco Polo, and
watched a little bit of it.
They actually show this process of a giant cauldron and the prisoners being like, no, and then guys just like hawking off limbs and throwing them off.
Alive or dead?
So the whole body was not good for this. They would just cut off legs or arms and then use the trunk would just be like thrown away.
Uh-huh.
But they were they were alive when they were cutting their arms off.
That show has Wong from Doctor Strange. Benedict Wong. Isn't that weird? Yeah. Benedict is not a common name.
He's British.
Is he?
Yeah.
I'm not sure he is.
He is.
Okay, so both of the stars of Doctor Strange are named Benedict, and Benedict Wong's character was named Wong, and that was in the comic books going back to the 60s. That's a weird little synchronicity in some way, right?
Another bizarre fact.
Add that to the list. That's 26.
Number 21. Oh. The half-blind leading the blind. There was a Byzantine emperor, and his name was Basil I. He captured 15,000 Bulgarians in a battle, and then blinded 99 out of 100 of them. leaving the 100th guy with one eye. And then they had to lead the people with one eye led them back to wherever.
So he let him go.
He let him go.
But he left one guy with one eye.
And everybody else blinded. That's fucked. Number 22. Vlad the Impaler.
Oh, yeah, Dracula.
Earned his nickname by impaling enemies through the torso with large stakes and then putting them in the ground. Sometimes thousands of prisoners would be just impaled at the same time.
He was big into impaling. And here's something interesting. These were large beams. So, these might be 10 inches in circumference, sharpened. You could last for days.
That's what they would say. Many victims lived in agony for days.
Sometimes they smeared honey on the dying victims.
So that flies
and bugs would eat them.
Do they start at the anus?
Yeah, that's usually where the...
and they would just go up and up and up. Yeah. And then sometimes out your mouth or something?
Sometimes you would slide down on it as the execution went on. It's similar to crucifixion in some ways. It's hard to imagine anything worse than a crucifixion, but this was pretty bad.
Yeah.
I mean, think of the splinters.
Imagine the tweezers you need. Number 23.
And that Vlad Tepes is
Dracula.
Is who Dracula was based on.
Number 23. You may know Harriet Tubman from her Underground Railroad, which helped free a lot of slaves. But did you know she actually led wartime raids during the Civil War?
Yeah, the movie came out about her a couple of years ago with that Cynthia Erivo, who's about to be in Wicked.
Oh, cool. I never saw the movie, the Harriet Tubman movie.
It was quite good.
In 1863, Harriet Tubman and Union Colonel James Montgomery stormed a Confederate base, or a plantation, with 300 black Union soldiers. They swept through nearby plantations, burning homes and barns. Slave men, women, and children came streaming from the countryside, and more than 720 slaves were shoveled to freedom. That was the first raid led by a woman during the Civil War, and Tubman liberated 10 times more slaves through that than she freed on the Underground Railroad.
Yeah, all right.
Number 24. 2 natives of the country of Siam were Chang and Eng Bunker.
Yeah. Do you want me to pop this bubble for you?
Go for it, buddy.
They were the original Siamese twins.
They were.
They were conjoined twins.
At the sternum.
And they came to America. P.T. Barnum, played by Hugh Jackman, put them in his circus. They became quite wealthy, and they ended up marrying sisters. So as racist as America was, I guess, back in the 1800s,
they were kind of progressive.
Siam is now not Vietnam. It's a southeastern Asian.
Singapore. No, Indonesia?
Yeah, look up what is Siam now. So anyway, they had a bunch of kids.
Thailand.
It's Thailand.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they weren't racist because they were Asian, and they weren't ableist against them because they're conjoined twins.
Right. Yeah, good for them.
And I guess they had so many kids, that means there was a lot of fucking going on with your brother in the room.
There's a lot of foursomes.
Maybe. I don't know.
Well, at least a threesome. Every time it's a threesome.
But apparently they were great citizens. People only had the best things to say about them.
Well, let me tell you something before they joined the circus.
They were already joined before the circus.
Or let me... Anyway, shut the fuck up.
They were conjoined.
They were joined at the sternum, and in 1839, they bought 110 acres in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, and they decided to settle down.
What year?
1839. Now...
God, that was decades before the Civil War even.
During the American Civil War, in 1865, Union General George Stoneman raided North Carolina and then drafted all the locals using a lottery wheel.
Drafted them into the Union Army?
Yes. Eng's name was drawn.
But not...
Unfortunately for Stoneman, Chang's name was not drawn, and there was little General Stoneman could do.
Or you both got to go.
The brothers were not only joined at the sternum.
Good God, they must have been like in their 40s or 50s at that point, right?
Close to it, yeah.
Yeah.
The brothers were not only joined at the sternum, their livers were fused. Neither twin could serve in the war. Interesting, right?
What happened when one of them died? Did they both die?
I would imagine that's what would have to happen back then.
If they shared a liver.
I think then we should do a in-depth. Eng and Chang.
Chang and Ing.
Chang and
For
Eng.
some reason, Chang always comes first. Probably alphabetically, but Chang and Ing Bunker.
And Bunker is a weird name.
They took that as the last name from Bunker Hill. They fully embraced being Americans.
Oh, that's really cool. How do you know this bullshit?
I don't know, man. I read a lot.
You read like digests, and your brain picks up on the facts.
Seems to work, right?
Yeah, it does, actually.
I mean, how many clunkers have I thrown your way? And I didn't know any of these topics before we started talking about it.
One big clunker.
Which one?
You. All right.
Okay.
Number 25, our last bizarre historical fact of the episode. What's that smell? There were 1 million horses used during the Civil War. And
they leaned heavily into the American Civil War, didn't they?
There were a lot of things during the Civil War I did not know about. Well, the amount of urine that those 1 million horses would produce would be, in one day, just in one day, the amount of urine was enough to fill over 15 standard-sized swimming pools.
Actually,
that actually doesn't sound too bizarre.
That sounds probably
if it was like
right.
Olympic size.
I mean, there's an expression. I got to
piss like a racehorse. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of the After Buzz.
All right.
Bizarre historical facts. Make sure to check in next time for our next 25, every Tuesday and Thursday for the After Buzz. And don't forget to listen to the Buzz Adams Morning Show Monday through Friday, 6 to 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time on 95.5 KLAQ.